This is part 2 of Zamara's story. So code blue, her lungs collapsed on themselves. They have no idea why they collapsed. She come back incubated to me. She was in a medically induced coma. She was stable throughout the whole day. They kept her sedated. Obviously, she had all these tubes in. She still kept trying to sit up and pull them tubes off from her. That baby had a fight in her. And I had to look to her many, many days there for strength because I didn't have it anymore. So the next morning rolls around. The nurse had to call the doctor and tell them they needed to hurry up and get down there because Zamara was sitting up trying to yank the tubes off from her because they were maxed out on medication. So they get the tubes off in one of my posts. I'm holding her. She's on my shoulder, and she's got a purple gown on. She was what? And I got to hold her. So they find out it's metastatic neuroblastoma, December 27th. Stage 4. It was genetic, which is a lot harder to treat than regular neuroblastoma. Only 1% chance of children get a genetic neuroblastoma, so it is a lot harder to treat, and there's not a lot of studies on it. They asked me if I'd be willing to sign her for studies. I said yes, as long as you're not going to poke and prod at her any more than she already has to be. So they transfer us to the children's hospital upstairs on the 5th floor. That incubated, she was on the ICU unit, and I didn't have a really bad experience that time. One time I had to yell at a nurse because Zamara was crying and crying, and you could tell she was in pain. The nurse turned around, and after I asked for her pain medication, the nurse said to me, it's just a temper tantrum. And I had to snap at that woman, and I said, the baby's fucking covered head to toe in tumors. There's no, it's a temper tantrum anymore. So anyway, we get transferred to the children's hospital. So December 28th, is when we started chemo, the first round of chemo on her. And before this, the 27th, they gave me a rundown of what her treatment was going to look like. And they didn't give me another option. This is the option they gave me. 5 rounds of chemo. That was the first one. The second one was possibly surgery, and there was a question mark to that. The third one was going to Boston to harvest her stem cells. The 4th was radiation, and the 5th was putting her stem cells in Boston back into her body. Now, chemo was 5 rounds. The first 2 rounds of chemo with the same drug. The last 3 were with a totally different drug. 28th comes, we start chemo. The 30th, I had her brother. 4 hours later, after I cut his umbilical cord myself, I was back downstairs with her. I had them partially clear me where I could go up and down floors because as it wasn't fair to him, it wasn't fair to her for me to leave her either. I get to bring home 1 baby and I possibly wouldn't have tomorrow with my second. So I'm up and down floors. I breastfed my son. I pumped in between. I gave the nursery milk in case he needed it. They had my number to call me so I could come back up if they needed me for my son. I split my time. So January 1st, my son was released. We were back down with Zamara. Thankfully, the children's hospital, they allowed me to keep my son there. And if any of y'all are on here, I really appreciate what y'all did for me and my daughter. You guys were fantastic with her. I have not one complaint from that children's hospital. So this 3 days into chemo now. We have 9 days after. They did tell me that at 9 days after chemo, her cells would plummet. We were on isolation due to other people on the unit having RSV, and it wasn't just for cancer. So we were isolated to our room 98% of this time throughout the month because we couldn't risk her getting sick. 9 days after chemo, her cells plummet. They tell me she needs a blood transfusion. I say, okay. Well, this was the only options they gave me. So I run with it because I don't know any better. So they have to give her a blood transfusion. Her cells finally, they went back up due to the blood transfusion. Thankfully, Zamara she was kind of herself that day. She, after 2 weeks of not getting down whatsoever, and the only word out of her mouth to them people were no, she got down. She took a few steps. She was Zamara a little bit. And then that was for maybe 2 days. And then she started to plummet again. Her eyes went yellow. So her eyes, the right eye mainly was getting puffy. And it was turning yellow. And within 5 hours later, my daughter's eye was completely black and blue, like somebody hit her in the face. The left eye started turning the same way. So they rushed her in for a CT scan. Her tumors from the neck up were still rapidly growing. But from the neck down, they had stopped. They weren't shrinking like they were supposed to or breaking them up, but they had stopped them from growing. They had no idea, as they've never had this happen before, I guess, in the United States. So the United Kingdom, who had been studying this a lot longer, they had to call them, oncology did, to find out what to do. The United Kingdom had informed them that they needed to immediately get the baby into radiation. This was January 14th. They had started emergency radiation on her for 3 days. I had brought her down. They had called me when she was done. I was right back down there with her. I walked her back up to the children's hospital as I rolled up on the bed with her. So it seemed to be going okay. That Friday she had a port, PICC line in her left arm. She needed a permanent one to be able to do the rest of the chemo and the treatment she needed, and to be able to put the stem cells back in her. So Friday she went down for her new PICC line, her permanent PICC line to be put in, and to start second round of chemo. So she did great. She came back up. We started the second round of chemo. A couple days went by. She was good. 9 days later, her cells did plummet like they were supposed to, as they informed me in the beginning. They kept giving her this injection in her leg to help bring them back up once a week. After chemo, she just, through the last week before she passed away, she had 2 blood transfusions again. She had 2 platelet transfusions at the same time, as this chemo kind of did a lot of worse damage to her. As I remember the first time I brushed her hair, January 11th, and I fell to my knees as I brushed her hair, and my baby's hair was falling out. She actually turned around and looked at me, and she grabbed me by my cheeks as I was bawling. And the way she looked at me, she just, like everything was going to be okay. And Zamara always kissed my forehead, as that's what I did to her. So second round of chemo really did some damage to her with this drug. We end up in the ICU unit the 23rd. So the 23rd we end up in the ICU unit due to things I was noticing with her that I let oncology know, like her tongue just was doing this, kind of like when she had a seizure, it just was doing this retarded motion. Her eyes were getting stuck, and every time she was blinking, it was a really fast blink. Her eye was like jumping with her blinking. They ended up, that's when they transferred us. They said, I think we need